My guest this week is Lance Bangs. Lance is an artist, filmmaker, and showrunner, and has produced and directed documentaries and concert films for R.E.M., Sonic Youth, Nirvana, the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, the Black Keys, LCD Sound System, Beck, Arcade Fire, The Gossip, Green Day, Pavement, Slint, and the Postal Service. He's also directed second unit for Spike Jonze's Beastie Boys story on Apple TV and produced the feature documentary, The Elephant Six Recording Company, which was released theatrically in 2023. He has created videos for Death Cab for Cutie, Sonic Youth, Nirvana, Neutral Milk Hotel, Green Day, The Shins, Belle and Sebastian, Yeah Yeah Yeahs, R.E.M., The Black Keys, Odd Future, Kanye West, Lizzo, Joe Strummer, and George Harrison. Lance has also been heavily involved in the filming and production of the Jackass television series and its subsequent movies, and he regularly produces and directs comedy specials for performers such as Marc Maron, Michelle Wolf, Moses Storm, Hannibal Buress, Chelsea Peretti, and David Cross. He's directed episodes of television shows such as Portlandia, Better Things, The Greatest Event in Television History, Mr. Show with Bob and David, Mel Brooks' History of the World Part 2, and the Odd Future Tyler the Creator series, Loiter Squad. And he has recently produced his second feature film about the band Pavement, which has been screening at festivals in advance of a spring 2025 theatrical release. And his work is in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City and Kunstwerk in Berlin. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome the Revolutions Per Movie, Lance Bangs. Hi, Lance.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm super great. We're going to talk about two Pavement documentaries, a total treat. It's a 2 for Thursday today. But I wanted to ask you, in your introduction that I read, you've been part of capturing so many movements and working with so many incredible artists. But what was a young Lance Bangs listening to and watching before discovering the underground? Was there anything that was influential to you as you went into it?
Yeah, quite a bit. I was in a military family that moved fairly often and was in the Deep South quite a bit, Montgomery, Alabama, Valdosta, Georgia, different parts of New Jersey during high school. And at the time, in the sort of like mid 1980s to late 1980s, the television show Night Flight, which ran on the USA Network,
The best.
was really just full of music documentaries and unusual music videos that weren't going to get run on MTV, whether they had content that was like beyond the sort of the moral boundaries of what MTV was willing to show,
Right.
or were politically or physically violent or sexually charged or whatever. And you know, they would show like Another State of Mind, they would show the Rocky Horror Picture Show, they would show Erg, A Music War. It was a way to kind of see the Minutemen, Daniel Johnston, like all sorts of great stuff that was going on at that time. And I would ride my bike and find record stores and kind of dig through interesting things that were going on. It was the era where, you know, SST was putting out the Minutemen and Sonic Youth and Dinosaur and Husker Du and Black Flag and all kinds of great stuff.
Sure.
And even like the kind of like larger like college radio thing, you could hear R.E.M. or the Replacements or bands like that, like over the airwaves of college radio stations.
Like, what was your first camera? Or when did you gravitate into wanting to make stuff?
I started shooting stuff on Super 8 millimeter, which was sort of like a household format that was being replaced by video cameras at the time. And so thrift stores or junk shops or places like that would have the Super 8 millimeter film cameras that were being discarded or you know, traded in or turned into a pawn shop or whatever as people switched over to video. And at the time, film stock was available at pretty much like every drugstore and grocery store and supermarket on kind of like end cap displays. And the processing was always very inexpensive, like almost like a loss leader. Those places would charge you 49 cents or 99 cents to process the film, and then they would draw you in to buy it. So it was small enough and easy enough to kind of pocket or put inside a sweatshirt. You know, if you didn't have money to fully pay for it as a non-employed 11-year-old, but then you could scrounge up 99 cents to get it processed and wait the week and a half or 2 weeks for it to come back.
Did you edit on like those little Super 8 reel-to-reel things with the little camera? How would you doing that?
I just had scissors and tape. I didn't have like a editing machine or a viewing machine. And what Chris is talking to, there were mechanical things that would kind of like put a light source behind the small 8 millimeter frame of film to see what you're doing and make a cut. But I was typically holding it up to like a bare light bulb and using scissors when I was cutting stuff at that point. Or more often than not, just like letting the entire cartridge be intact for the whole 50 feet and not really. I wasn't doing things with other people where there were like actors or angles or like now we cut to the special effects or whatever. It was more sort of visual things inside the laundromats or gas station bathrooms or places that I was like spending time or hanging out.
Well, then what was the first band you filmed?
I shot footage of the Replacements at City Gardens in Trenton, New Jersey, which is a really amazing view.
That's a legendary rough venue.
That venue was insane. Like I don't even, without being hyperbolic, it was a former car dealership in a very rough part of Trenton, New Jersey, on a street called Calhoun Street. And the car dealership had gone out of business. And a letter carrier, like a postal worker named Randy Now,
right?
Punk name, not like his real last name. Was very fond of bands and things that were going on in the early to mid 80s. And so he started taking the proceeds he was earning from being a postal worker, which I think at that time was maybe still a government job. I think it got privatized at some point, but that might have been during the era where it was like a civil service job with benefits and all that. And so he was booking, Black Flag and Minor Threat and early 80s hardcore to go do performances inside like a fairly cement building. And it was within driving distance of New York City or Philly, but it was far enough away that promoters weren't threatened if you did a show in Trenton. Like currently, the band goes and plays Coachella, they're not allowed to play Los Angeles or San Diego or Pasadena or 90-mile circumference during the time of a week or two. Like promoters can do that where they don't let bands also play Eugene if they're playing Portland if they can control it or whatever.
Right.
And that's why there are not as many great shows in Corvallis, Oregon, or other nearby areas historically. But at that time, like Trenton wasn't a concern of the people doing venues in New York or Philly. So if Sonic Youth wrote 12 new songs for a record and wanted to test them out live, they could go down and play in Trenton, and there wouldn't be like writers from Rolling Stone being like, the new Sonic songs are poppier and they're 3 minutes and not 9 minutes. And Lee seems less involved on this record. Like, nothing like that would happen if you tried out material in Trenton. So the Ramones and Sonic Youth would come down and sort of like test new songs or material or kind of get warmed up. Other bands would start their first American shows there because it was a safe place to fly into New York at JFK and get your band together. And so Sinead O'Connor with like Mike Joyce and Andy Rourke from the Smiths, right after the Smiths had broken up, like they performed there. A lot of performers like that would do their first American show at City Gardens where it was sort of out of the attention or, whatever. But it was an incredible mutant landscape of violent skinheads that would go see shows there. There was like less security and less, like the thing it's really known for that we're kind of about to talk to you now is that there'd be like a wall of death of, like mid 80s, early 80s Metallica or Agnostic Front or like New York hardcore bands. And then like all the kind of like East Coast, like Judge and Gorilla Biscuits and all this play there. But like there were skinheads in New Jersey that were racially charged and motivated, racist skinheads that was a place you could go kind of like kick some ass or fight teenagers or knock people over. And that, you could easily get away by jumping in your car in the parking lot or having your friends look out. And it wasn't as secure of a venue. Who the bouncer was, the door guy was James Murphy. It was James Murphy. So James Murphy was not about to knock out the skinheads or whatever. He was just like a cool guy in the local area that was like into bands or whatever. The bartender was Jon Stewart.
Yes, I'd heard that.
Crazy that this existed.
It was basically you did not go outside alone, right? You just like, we have to team up.
Yeah, for sure. Although Jem Cohen shot really beautiful portraits of teenagers lined up to go see Fugazi in the summer of 93, I think it was. And so in his film Instrument, there's a bunch of like Super 8 portraits up against the wall of City Gardens of, the faces of like the kids that were going to see shows at that time.
Right.
And cars would get broken into and amazing performances. And so, like Nirvana played there. The song Perfect Circle by R.E.M was written in the parking lot there when Michael Stipe was kind of in a meditative mood looking out at, teenagers and the sun going down, and we're
Wow.
on the road, we're away from Athens, and we're in this place, and so he writes Perfect Circle there.
And the Venom concert audience thing that Thurston put out. All right.
Exactly, that like audio recording of like Venom saying all the, Venom Peach singer, yeah, all that there. Ween played all their early shows, including opening for the Butthole Surfers, and the venue got lit on fire. I was there for a show where Chris Cornell climbed up on the water pipes and was like strong enough to be supporting himself and like kicking upwards and knocked all the like the tiles down from the ceiling, but then he broke a pipe. Just like crazy man would happen.
Right.
You get, it was like inexpensive cost to go see there. And all the other kind of weirdo kids from, New Jersey and Pennsylvania and New York were showing up there because it was like you could get in to see Sonic Youth there if you couldn't afford to get in or it sold out too quickly in New York or Philly. It was like you could catch Nirvana there when the New York and Philly shows were sold out or whatever. So yeah, amazing place.
So you shot the replacements then?
Shot the replacements there. I shot Nine Inch Nails there. I shot Front 242. Just like, Super 8 footage in black and white of these shows and performances going on. I think I shot some footage of Ween and the Butthole Surfers as well, but I got out of there. I was not there the night of the fire.
Right.
Yeah.
No, there's plenty of shows. It didn't matter. I was, even if I knew what the Butthole Surfers were going to deliver, and I knew the venue, I was like, "Where are the exits again?" Just to be safe, because I thought maybe I was going to die. But what would you do with this footage? Was this just for yourself? Would you look at it? Would you share it?
I didn't really share it much. I at the time I didn't have access to like a video camera of my own, but I would rent one from a public library and set it up and project my films on a wall, often of like a 24-hour laundromat or a gas station bathroom, and record the film footage from the wall. And then I had like cassette recorders that I would record narration of like what I was going through or what things were like at the time.
Uh-huh.
And I wasn't really screening those much or showing them to other people, but I was tabling for Greenpeace at the Green Tour when R.E.M came through Philadelphia and played at the Mann Music Center. And Jem Cohen, who's a great filmmaker, was traveling with Michael at the time. And the two of them saw me, like a teenager giving out information for Greenpeace at their concert, and saw that I had a Super 8 camera and came over and said hello. And at the time, Michael was giving out grants to underground filmmakers from a company that he and a director named Jim McKay had called C100 Film Corps. And they were based in Athens. And Jim McKay, who's gone on to direct episodes of like The Wire and Breaking Bad, I think, and a lot of like great current prestige television,
Right.
was also like an independent filmmaker making features and documentaries throughout the late 80s and throughout the 90s. He and Michael were making public service announcements. Like at the time on television, like the major networks, the government forced them to allocate a certain amount of time during commercial breaks for things that were in the public interest. And so that meant like 30-second black and white commercials that encourage you to think about recycling or registering to vote or not spoiling the waterways in your environment and things like that. And so they would kind of take that window of opportunity and have really great visual artists like Jem Cohen make black and white Super 8 poetic images with this kind of like a message that was like general civic good advice for people. And those would get run on television stations all across the United States, like during commercial breaks. A certain number of them each hour had to make some time for these public service announcements. So he and I exchanged information, and I mailed him copies of some of the films that I was making while, kind of like leaving home and running around these different like military bases and parts of New Jersey and New York and Philly. And an artist named Chris Bilheimer that was in Athens with Michael saw those and really kind of helped get me set up to go down to Athens. And so I went there when I was 17. And they kind of set up for me to live with Jim Herbert, who's a kind of an underground filmmaker and painter, and who had directed a bunch of R.E.M's videos and was like a mentor to Michael and had sort of taught him photography and filmmaking when he was an art student in the early 80s in Athens. And I ended up kind of moving in with those people, and working with R.E.M. and if they just needed like background visuals to project behind them for a tour, or music videos, or award acceptance speeches if they couldn't all fly to Italy to receive some award, or whatever things like that. I would direct or work on with them, and then really got mentored by Michael and a lot of other great artists that were in Athens. And then other bands would come through Athens, which is how I met like Nirvana and Sonic Youth and My Bloody Valentine and Pavement in the early 90s as they were like touring and playing the 40 Watt Club, or in general, Michael was very generous and would sort of like tell those other artists or bands about me and send them copies of things I was working on or show them, or um, be really supportive. And at the time, there was so much goodwill and love for REM among other musicians and bands and writers and filmmakers that it really was helpful to sort of have that be the person that was behind your work and supporting you and sharing it with people.
And when you're filming, let's say, Pavement,
Yeah.
are you thinking, oh, someday I'll have use for this? Or are you just like, I just want to capture it for myself?
No, I genuinely just had an instinct for capturing things. Like I wasn't really sure I was going to be alive that long. Like it seemed very precarious, and I was more just like excited or really in love with these moments or these experiences that were happening and wanted to document them, but was not taking steps to like mail copies to MTV or
Right.
I never worked on film sets or learned like how to, I never like went to film school. I never interned my way up the ladder of like how a production typically works on a commercial in Atlanta. Like I wasn't doing that kind of thing. I was just living in this college town and studying. They didn't have a film school, but I took like art classes from Jim Herbert. And once a year he would teach a thing called technical problems. That was like a secret way to not have people that just wanted to do Terminator 2 or Star Wars, but who wanted to make like Stan Brakhage, Jean Vigo experimental films, to kind of take a course once a year in the art school that didn't say that it was a filmmaking class, that was just called technical problems. But if other people had seen you around town and thought that you might be interesting, or if you were a good spoken word poet, or if you were a painter who had great composition, you would get sort of like informed about this secret uh, way of kind of like making. It was all on film. Like you couldn't like do something on a camcorder. It was shooting generally Super 8, and some people had access to 16 millimeter. Um, and then projecting those and sort of like looking them with other artists and students and kind of talking through them. Like you'd play it once, either silent or with whatever soundtrack that you had made on a cassette and sunk up to it. And then you'd play it again and kind of talk quietly over it and be asked questions and sort of, not that you had to defend it, but you would explain like what you were intending, what you're trying
Right.
to do, whatever. And so those were generally not edited. Like no one was hooked up to like a video editing machine. These were just like 50 feet of Super 8 film or 100 feet of 16 millimeter film running physically through a projector. But learned a lot from that. And Jim Herbert's a great filmmaker and mentor. He studied under Stan Brakhage, who, for people who are listening that maybe haven't gone down this route of experimental film, like Stan Brakhage was out in Colorado and would take insect wings or moth wings and glue them to blank leader and then run that through a projector. And so the light is going through the physical wings of insects. And then you're watching effectively like light that looks like moths fluttering around on the screen, which then draws any moths that are in the room towards the light source in the screen, like a moth light would. But it also feels like stop motion animation. Like every single second, you're seeing a chunk of another insect wing that's glued to the physical leader of the film. And you go into almost like a hypnotic state, or your brain reacts differently, or just like all the things that happen when you're looking at something 24 times a second that's flickering on and off with a 180-degree shutter. Like that's happening. He would make experimental films like of the birth process, of color fields, or these things that like they felt like they had meaning, or your brain would kind of fill in meaning or a subtext to them, even though it might just be that you're looking at a bunch of insect parts blown up through a projector. So that sort of world of work. But then he would also direct music videos for REM that were also very deliberately like not lip sync, not edited together from the typical ways that things were getting made at the time. But they would be beautiful. He would do a technique called rephotography where he would shoot 16 millimeter footage and then project that on a wall and then refilm that. And there's types of projectors that were made for sports, like high school sports teams could stop a thing and have a freeze frame and then wind it backwards and then play it in slow motion to see was the tight end in the right position when the block went off or whatever.
Oh, that's how that was done. Okay.
Yeah. And so with that kind of projector, it keeps full brightness and doesn't burn the film. And you can like freeze on a frame and then like lay two images on top of each other, projectors, and then like bring one to life for a second. So he made a great, like the first half of the album Reckoning, all the songs on side one of Reckoning, which is called Left and Right on that, the way that album was laid out. He had live footage of them that he shot with one camera and then re-photographed it off the wall. So it'll look like the band are moving and then they suddenly stop and freeze. And then you zoom in a little bit on it and then you see the film grain, then it starts again. Like just kind of really beautiful, inventive things that
Yeah.
felt like music or made your brain make connections, but they were not like a well lit close up of a conventionally attractive singer singing a song.
Yeah, and it was exactly what you would want visually from a band like REM who were so mysterious still.
For
You
sure.
know, you're just like, it was the perfect visual explanation of them at the time.
Yeah. And so Chris Billheimer and Michael Stipe kind of helped me get set up with Jim Herbert, and I moved into his house and learned a lot from him. But other other artists and musicians who saw how great REM's videos at that time were and how different they were from typical videos would occasionally reach out and try and hire Jim Herbert to direct projects for them. So like while we were there, we only had one landline at the house, and Madonna kept calling, trying to get Jim Herbert to direct music videos for her because he was so great. And he got so, it was not what he was trying to do with his life. And he was a professor in this art department and did these massive paintings and was like a brilliant guy. But he took our phone off the wall. Like we couldn't get phone calls because he didn't want Madonna to keep bugging him after she had seen some R.E.M. and B-52 things that he had made. So it was a,
That's so
a pretty
perfect.
wild way to be like living. And it kind of incurred this sense of like making things that were not, you know, uh, learned behavior from a typical system. And that like, go ahead and say no to Madonna and go make something with Neutral Milk Hotel instead.
Yeah, I mean, getting into the first Pavement documentary we're going to talk about and DVD Slow Century, I mean, Pavement is coming up through the same transgressive movement, in terms of like not wanting to sell out, making videos that are very different than what traditional music videos are. The DVD, half of it is their music videos and commentaries, which are very, I'm going to get into that too. And then the other half of the DVD is the documentary you made. But when you discovered Pavement for the first time, did you read about them before you even heard them? Because for me, I kept hearing about them, but I had no way of finding that single yet.
Yeah. They came through and played in Philadelphia at the Khyber Pass pub. And I was going back to Pennsylvania or New Jersey during the summers to go like work at electronic stores. There was a chain called Silo that sold like stereo equipment and washers and dryers and video technology.
Okay.
And I would go work there during the summers and earn money and then use that money to kind of shoot more film stock. Um, and they played a show during, I think, their first tour. Like they did like a radio session at KDVS in California, then flew out to the East Coast and did a few shows while they were like a drag city band. And uh, happened to go see one of those and was amazed by, like, Gary Young was drumming at the time, and I was generationally like very skeptical or reluctant about people that were older. Like I had a hard line thing. Yeah. And so it felt weird to me that these like guys that looked like college students older than me by a couple of years, but they had this guy that looked more like an adult that was drumming,
Yeah.
that looked like a kind of a desert rat character, like a hippie with like a lot of like sun exposure. Um, and he had really striking eyes, and I couldn't tell what his deal was, and he was so shambolic.
Was he doing the handstands when you saw them? And
The
like,
first show was not the handstands, but then I went back and saw them in the summer of 1992, and they had played the Reading Festival in England, and they'd already recorded Slanted and Enchanted. But I don't think it was quite out yet, but it was the kind of thing that people had cassette copies in a different sequence of like
right.
those songs before Matador put it out. And it was so great and so effortless and catchy. And like, why does this feel so easy for this songwriter to just
Totally.
pass these things out so, unconcerned,
It
and they
was
just
so
were pouring out of
free.
them. Yeah, it was completely free and didn't feel sweaty and was sounded like things that I liked. It did sound like the fall, but that's fine. But, like
Yes.
it did sound like New Zealand bands, but that's great. Like it was exciting and it did sound like the Velvet Underground, but like um the lyrics were so great to me and didn't feel overly fussy or self-satisfied. They just felt like they were just like casting out casually of this person in a completely poetic and astounding way. And the guitar playing was so great. Like I loved everything about it. And uh they played live, and it's the footage is in the movie. It was I was not aware that they had just maybe come back from doing the Reading Festival. Like Nirvana in '92 got to pick the bands that were playing their day of the Reading Festival, and I think Pavement were like among the young bands that they were excited about and had go over and play early that day on the main stage of Reading in '92. But again, I don't think the record was out in the U.S. and they were amazing, and Gary was shirtless and doing handstands
Yes.
and being bizarre. And there's like a door at the back of the stage of the Khyber, which is like up against the street, and that's sort of how people can get some air or get out of the sweat and like step out from the stage. And I think Gary was like handing out leaves to people outside. And again, you couldn't tell if he was like doing a bit or being conceptual or being deliberately like eccentric, or if he was like an unhoused person that you were having to walk past to go get into the venue. Um,
Yeah.
and the rest of the guys look like college students in thrift store t-shirts.
They're babies in this footage.
Yeah, and like so fresh faced. Yeah. But it's like such an amazing show. And I was like, I knew I was excited and wanted people to find out about this and see this band and hear about them. And so it became important to me to like get a video camera. So I took all the money I'd like worked for that summer and bought a camera to kind of continue shooting video footage, as well as the kind of film and Super 8 that I was doing, that it was like now time to be documenting bands like Nirvana and Sonic Youth and Fugazi and Pavement and a band in Athens that were called 5/8 and another band called Bliss. Like all the things that were around me musically that I was excited about, I started filming the concerts and shooting high 8mm footage of them and recording audio, and really kind of got excited about that while still making Super 8 stuff for my own personal films as well.
Right. Well, yeah, having the high eight come in, it was the era where I remember you'd maybe borrow one from your uncle,
Yeah,
and all of a sudden you're filming everything on tour.
yeah,
It was just
yeah,
really freeing. And then you were left with 15 stacks of these things that you may not look at
yeah,
again
yeah,
for a long time.
yeah,
But yeah, it was really kind of incredible, I think, for a lot of bands at this time. They were able to self-document or have friends document for the first time. So it's really weird. Like I saw the Embarrassment documentary
oh
recently,
wow, okay,
and they're talking about like, yeah, and then we used to make monster movies together. And there's the footage of them as 7 to 8 year olds making monster movies. And then we go through my brother's record collection, and there's footage of them as children going. It's
yeah,
just the era has totally changed in terms of being able to capture just moments that people didn't even think would be used.
yeah, for sure. So yeah, '92, seeing them in August at the Khyber Pass in Philadelphia, and then filming them at the 40 Watt Club in early September. I think it's the 12th of September '92 that they came through there. I think I went and saw them in Atlanta the night or two. Either a band would typically play Atlanta one night, then Athens the following night, or
Sure.
vice versa. There's a filmmaker in Atlanta who shot video footage of them and has footage of Gary falling off the stage while
Yes.
trying to like
Classic.
stand. Um, In the show that I filmed in Athens, like Gary was shirtless and like hitting the drums with a towel and like, kind of like doing handstands and
I
like
know exactly
coming,
what you're
yeah,
talking about.
coming out to like upstage Malcolmus. And Malcolmus was doing at that time like more of the sort of like he would just do like a solo electric guitar strummed like an acoustic thing of like a song he was in the process of writing or wasn't recorded yet, or the rest of the guys might not have ever heard it or didn't know it, but he had so many songs inside him. And then Gary might start just doing a drum beat behind it that wasn't necessarily what would be how that song turned out a few years from now.
Right.
And then Gary would sometimes seem like he was impatient and just wanted to be doing rock songs. And he would like almost come out and like stop Steven from doing that by getting in the way or doing a handstand or talking to the audience while Steven was singing, or not having the attention span or patience for these like poetic silver juice type moments that Steven was doing.
Was that frustrating to you, or
It
was that
was, it was, to be honest.
okay?
Like I was in love with everything that was happening and wanted to have like a continuous take of this like song that had not existed before,
Sure.
might be being like put together in real time.
Yeah. 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 The artist versus like the person who's trying to fuck it all up.
Yeah. And then like, yeah, like, and again, this like older guy is coming out and like stopping him from doing like Black Wall, or our singer or whatever. And like it felt almost like a guy that didn't get it or a bully like stopping Elliott Smith from completing the verse he was generating in front of you.
Well, the age thing was real too. I went and saw Guided by Voices right before Alien Lanes came out at
Yeah.
South by Southwest, just by chance. And we left and we're like, those 35-year-old motherfuckers blew the state. And it was like they were
Yeah.
35 and we just were, our eyes were not used
Yeah.
to seeing a school teacher and
Yeah.
like a mechanic and, a painter on stage yet who had lived a life so young. Now it's just, but at the time, the underground hadn't aged yet.
Yeah.
Bands blew up after, they exploded after 2 years. They just went elsewhere. And so having legacy was rare. But the funny thing about you working with Pavement, in terms of you've done several music videos for them, in the commentary, they allude to it a bit. Like you had to do 2 different versions of Major Leagues.
Yeah.
What was the story behind that?
I think it's my fault. Like I honestly did not know. Like I was ignorant of what the needs or expectations of a European record label were. Like I was so outside of that system and truly never went to film school, never worked on professional sets. And so they needed a band to have like something that could be on German television where someone might like the melody of Spit on a Stranger and buy the compact disc or compact disc single of that for Domino to keep going. Like like that's a valid thing where they're gonna spend several $1,000s on the promotional element for the release of Terra Twilight. And like it's not helpful that like the band are friendly with a person who's I think a good filmmaker, but like not I wasn't making that kind of like what would look like a pulp video or whatever and play on German's version of MTV2 or whatever. And so it was just exciting to me, like, oh, I can cover the cost of tagging along with Pavement for the East Coast tour and shoot footage and make something out of it. And Steven doesn't want to do a normal video, and we think those are boring and
Yeah.
that you look corny if you do them, and like and all that. And so we would just be like, oh, we're gonna drive up to the Mima Mounds in Washington, and like Dan Donahue and I are gonna shoot some 16 and Super 8, but we don't have the normal things of like lighting and playback and lip sync and a crystal sync to the motor of the camera. Like we weren't doing any of that, and so it didn't come out looking like a pulp video on MTV2 in Germany would have looked like or whatever. So we made a video, and we thought it was funny or we thought it looked good or whatever. It felt like hanging out, but it wasn't necessarily like what would help Domino to get Terra Twilight into the top 20 indie chart or whatever. Which is again nothing wrong with it. Like it's a valid thing for them to like have a need for or want, and it's kind that they let Pavement choose to like let me do the videos instead of someone from Los Angeles or whatever. But yeah, I don't think I delivered something with the first video that worked for that. And so then they wanted something else. And so Dan Donahue and I were in Athens, and this like local independent wrestling thing was going to book the venue, which is normally like an indie rock music venue.
Right.
Uh, but they were going to, rent the place out to some like independent wrestling circuit thing. And this woman turned up with like quarters inside her ear to make bail with, when, because she typically would get arrested every weekend, but she would hide a quarter in her ear to be able to like pay for a payphone call
Wow.
at the end of the situation. And
Okay.
no clothing under her like silver dress. And she saw that we were trying to film Dan. Like I thought I would just shoot Dan Donahue wearing headphones, lip syncing Major Leagues, and I would shoot through the foreground element of the wrestling event. And that he would just kind of go sit as close as he could to the ring. And the lighting from the ring would light him. And if his Walkman played the song close enough to the speed of the motor of the camera, which was not like a crystal sync motor, that I
Right.
could try and like line them up or whatever. But she saw that we were filming and Dan's kind of cute. And so she started trying to like dance up on him or be in the video too,
Oh,
or,
wow. So that was not planned.
no, not planned. So she just sort of like danced her way into the video. And, that came out really charming and felt like a Pavement video to me and worked. And I
Yeah.
think that version got aired more or seen more or
So Domino was cool with that
yeah,
one just
yeah.
because there was sync. That's so funny. I mean, the idea of Pavement making videos is funny too, because it just always feels like they would be a band that would also like steal the master tape of something and throw it in the river just as easily as being these things. Am I wrong? Did they enjoy making these?
They liked their friends who were funny. Like Dan Kretzky and Ryan at Drag City did that video for Cut Your Hair, which I think is great. And like
Yeah, sure.
they look great in it. They look cute. They look cool. They look funny. Like it has all the things that like would stand out in 1994 when that played on MTV up against like the Lemonheads or whatever who were trying to be attractive or whatever. Um, it And so they'd made a bunch of videos that I think they had an okay time with, where their friend Scott Glenn would go on tour and shoot funny footage or grab some Santa outfits or whatever. Then I think they made a few that were not as fun, where they had to like lip sync. Like they did the one for Rattled by the Rush,
Yeah,
like in the subway
they
system,
hate
and
it.
they're lit and they don't look happy and they're, and then like I think that they made several versions of that because to try and give it something to kind of like distance it or make it not look like a failed, it feels a too harsh of a word, but like an uncomfortable lip sync thing. They then,
Yeah.
tried comping that footage on the tile of a bathtub as a bathtub filled up with like
Yes.
green water or whatever. And like that wasn't the solution that. So, but like at that moment, if they'd had like a catchy, vibrant, likable video, like they might have been on MTV for Wowee Zowee. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I love that in the commentary. Steven's like, I thought this was going to be a hit.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
he's like, but I was smoking a lot of weed and it was
Yeah.
pretty slow.
Yeah.
And the commentary's really funny because like it sounds like Steven's playing a banjo and they're all kind of chiming in. But was that recorded before the tour had started? They were still an active band at that
They were an
point.
active band at that time. We did it
Okay.
in Athens, Georgia. It's recorded by myself and then Jeff Mangum of Neutral Milk Hotel. Like we were housemates, and Pavement were going to do a show at the 40 Watt. And probably after sound check before the show, we just went to my house, and which was like, it was the Elephant Six house with Jeff and Laura Carter and Julian and Robbie from Neutral Milk Hotel and Music Tapes and all those people. And Jeff Mangum helped me set up microphones and record. I think, as you said, like I think Steven's kind of like strumming a banjo, and which is probably the Neutral Milk Hotel Julian banjo, as they watch the videos off of like a small television set and kind of
Yeah, it's great.
commentary tracks over the top of them. So yeah, that was while they were still like an active band, and I think that there's funny lines from Bob Nastanovich and Malkmus as they look back at all these things that it's very likely that Malkmus like stood in front of a camera for some of those videos and may have never watched them once since then. Like he wasn't someone
They
that was like,
said that
yeah,
in the commentary. They're like, "Oh, I've never seen this one."
yeah,
Like
was
it's
not
really
he was not a person that was like micromanaging or controlling his image or in the weeds or overthinking those things. He's sort of like, if an
Yeah.
obligation was told to him that it would help Matador if there was a video, he would cooperate in as much as he would, like, stand in front of the cameras for it, but he wasn't someone that was going to watch the edit and give notes and get super involved.
Yeah, it was funny, when I saw, Pavement finally I saw during the Crooked Rain tour in
Yeah.
Portland. And I remember already there just being tension on stage.
Yeah.
And just being like, oh, I hope I never meet that guy. And then he moves to Portland and he's friends with all my friends and we meet.
Yeah.
But at the time I was like, oh wow, like I think they're having fun. I can't tell. And that was quite a while ago.
Yeah.
But but there was something that dynamic was also in Sebado.
Yeah.
And other bands I loved, the Grifters.
Yeah.
There was always kind of a weird, like, chemistry thing of people starting something and then immediately just being like, this is going in different directions.
Yeah.
And I find that your documentary, there's kind of a melancholy streak in it too. But I really like it for that because it was put out like how many years after, like 4 years after they had quit?
So they broke up November of 99, and I probably edited and shot interviews with Steven in 2000, into 2001. I don't know if it came out in 2002, maybe.
Yeah, 2002 is when I got it in the store.
Okay. I think that makes sense.
So
I think it took a while because, like,
yeah,
there had not really been I could be wrong. I think that there were not like independent DVDs. Like, if you were at Warner Brothers, there was DVDs for the new Bette Midler and Madonna releases or whatever, but there was not like DVDs of like indie rock bands that were concert films and feature-length documentaries. And
yeah, that was to come. I mean, you could get like a weird, like I think it was Astavision VHS of like Flying Nun compilation, or something, but it was really few and far between. And then they were just out of print. You couldn't find it, and it was really rare to have a documentary about a band, from that time frame. Did you approach them or did they come to you to say, we want to tell this?
No, they approached me. Like, it was kind of a weird thing where I had directed multiple music videos for them over the years and also toured with them and shot footage on the road and shot a bunch of live concerts and just sort of, documented a lot of things. And then when they let me know that they were going to break up, it seemed important to like go film that final batch of shows. And then what was supposed to happen is that there was supposed to be like a VHS compilation and a DVD version of that strung together their music videos and that might include some like interstitial moments in between them. But I got excited reading about like the things that one could do with a DVD, and that I learned like the authoring programs and like the things you could do to kind of lay out, like if you do a thing, you can use a remote and kind of change angles from one video track to another. You can be like watching it from the soundboard and then click to like a handheld camera on stage or click to like a camera behind the drummer looking out. And so for the shows that I'd had a few camera operators, I like synced those up and clean up the audio and made it work where you could like essentially watch a multicam version of a concert. And again, I honestly don't know that there were other bands that had done that quite yet. Like typically like what would happen is that like a major company would shoot a concert of Billy Joel at whatever, but they would just make one master tape and that would get made for a VHS and they would compress it for DVD as the same linear, straightforward thing. They weren't going out of their way to like program it to give you the chance to like jump from one angle to another. So I kind of wanted to learn how to do that. And then I wanted to make this 90-minute documentary because I'd shot so much footage over the years. And I'd also like track down tapes that people had given to the band members or other people that I knew that were filming in other cities. And they had done some like local access TV interviews early on. They had done some like late night TV show appearances where they did not look like they wanted to be there. And that was funny. Like them kind of like not really wanting to take Jay Leno's hand.
Oh, yeah.
And so, stringing those all together with the interviews that they were all comfortable doing with me, it felt like I should make a movie out of this. There should be a documentary about the band or whatever. But what all that Matador was really asking for was their music videos in sequential order with like maybe something in between them, I kind of went beyond what was supposed to happen and made a 90-minute feature documentary made the concert films, like made commentary, figured out that I could do audio commentary tracks for all the videos and track down not just the band watching them and talking, but also Spike Jonze and Dan Koretsky and Ryan Murphy and Scott Blunt, all the people that had directed early videos for them and got their stories or their uh, versions of things and lined those up as well. So it was like multiple commentary tracks.
Yeah, it's great. Kim and Thurston and
Yeah,
and the directors, like you said, of Cut Your Hair, just
yeah,
being total great brats about it.
yeah,
It's
right
really
on.
fun. Yeah, it's so
Yeah,
and yeah, you're right. It is kind of the early era of being able to play with that medium and seeing how much you can put on it and
yeah,
secret Easter eggs and
yeah,
animated title sequence with the dragon flying through. I
totally.
mean, it feels very Pavement-y, if I can say it, and I think that was probably comforting to a lot of people who, were getting it and wanting to see what this was going to be.
Totally. And so, like you said, we did all these, Chris Billheimer, the artist that worked with R.E.M at the time, and then eventually Green Day, he designed these like motion menus. Like early on, it was like, he was figuring out how to manipulate the program After Effects that he came with Photoshop and like, could I do animation in this? Let me figure that out. These things that were kind of like fun to figure out what you could do with that format, um, which is maybe what I've try to do in my work. Like I never was like someone that's like, I'm going to become a music video director, but it was like, I was an artist. And when bands needed that, I would learn how to do those. And then when bands needed visuals to project behind them while they played live, I would learn how to do that. When Pavement wanted a DVD, like I figured out how to make a DVD. And then when other people would see those, I would get hired by other art. It's like, oh, this guy is good and people like him and the bands respect him and he can do a DVD. So then you do the Nirvana box set and the Pavement and the Sonic Youth and the Yeah Yes DVDs because it's like, oh, this is the guy that is good and from our world, but has figured out how to like do a motion menu or whatever.
Well, and it's funny after, you seen Pavement so early and documenting them so early and befriending them so early to see them grow and see like Stephen
Yeah.
Malkmus become like a guitar wizard.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like it is amazing to see the growth of the band. And one of the things I love about your footage is listening to the records. It's often very hard to tell where Steven stops and where Spiral starts,
Yeah.
and the roles and how their their difficult personalities and love for each other and difficulties with each other really are intertwined in the music. For a band that had so many parts going on, there's an awful lot of space in it. But one of the great things is watching your footage, you actually get to see how this came to be. Because to me, it was really hard to figure out just listening to it, like what's going on here.
Yeah. The footage kind of reveals quite a bit of that. And there's a few times that they did TV appearances where you see them writing a song. Um, when they write the song Preston School of Industry, which goes on to become the name that Spiral takes for his band, there's a TV channel in Europe that was like filming them, and the setup was like write a song in front of us, and so you get to see that dynamic of like them kind of like all messing around, and then like a catchy part that Spiral starts playing, Malcolmus is like, wait, what's that? Do that, and
That's
then
so cool.
Spiral wants Steven to do the lyrics or vocal, but Steven's like, no, you sing it. It's better if you sing, and just kind of watching that all play out. And then similarly, like the times on stage that Malcolmus would get annoyed or not be supportive when it was time to do Date with IKEA or Kennel District or whatever, and be kind of bratty and be like rolling around on the ground or checked out or disinterested or whatever. You see, like, oh, there is this like weird tension or not totally, commiserate support the whole time.
When you get footage like the Jay Leno thing,
Yeah.
is that like, is there a process to do that, or is that like we're just gonna do it on the down low, or like how do you do things like that?
The proper way is that you license that clip and get permission and all that, or you get a lawyer to kind of look at the overall work and be like, if you're using this short amount of it and you're commenting on it and it's in a documentary, there's a certain amount of like fair use that one can, make an argument for. But I think that we, again, like we just kind of like maybe made this thing ourselves and
It's brief.
yeah, it's brief.
And so you have all this footage, you're putting it together. How did you want to tell this story? Because, this documentary is very different than what we're going to talk about in a
Yeah.
minute. So did you feel like you had an obligation to tell something for them, or was it coming from you?
Yeah, I did. Like I was afraid that with them breaking up and not being like a live concern going forward, and that there hadn't been like an amazing concert film of them that people could watch, that like it was important to me for how much I love that band and that entire like wave of music that they were part of like 90s guitar based singer-songwriter, post Velvet Underground, bass guitar drums, rock and roll stuff, that I wanted that to exist in a way that people could see and that they wouldn't be forgotten or lost or whatever. And so like I was mad that Galaxy 500 had broken up without making like a great definitive uh concert film that everyone had all seen and had a VHS copy of or whatever. So I took it upon myself to make it. And I also am like, maybe in an overly enthusiastic way, like I love these people. I love the band. I love Bob Nastanovich. I want people to see how like warm and funny and charismatic and clever and hey, like the energy change when she's in the room, that like I wanted that to come
Yeah.
across. I loved the women that they had working with them. I love Deb Pastor, who's a tour manager who shot a lot of footage of them over the years. I wanted those personalities to kind of like come through. And so I made the documentary and then found this way of kind of getting it out into the world through the what should have just been like a video compilation. Um, and then while the band was broken up, it meant that people found their music, and the thing, got passed around. It was definitely in all the record stores and Tower Records and Barnes and Noble and Borders, like the things that existed in
Yeah.
that kind of early
The
2000s
Clinton
era.
Street videos of the world.
Exactly. That this existed and kind of got them out there. And like
Yeah.
they're a great band and people would have loved those records regardless. But on some level, this being out there and it being on YouTube means that like maybe more people have seen what a Pavement show in the 90s was like than a Yolo Tango show or a Built to Spill show, which didn't get put out in the same way in like a disc that you could watch. Fortunately, those bands are both still active and doing great tours and people love them. And but like if they had broken up when Pavement did in 99, like I don't know, like this kind of being out there for people to see, I think helps to kind of keep attention or new people finding or loving, or guitar aficionados watching it and being like, okay, oh, so he's tuned it to this weird tuning. And so that's how he's getting that sound, or okay, that's
That's
what's
how
going on.
Gary falls over
Yeah, exactly.
when he hits that cymbal.
Like, that's the part I was not aware of, is like all the people that are musicians that watch VHS and DVD releases to like learn what is the finger picking style that is behind what I am hearing here, or what is that? How do you play that thing or whatever?
So you've directed and edited and produced so many films since you made this. Is there anything that you would have done differently, looking back on this, early work that, was from like 25 years ago almost?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that could have been handled differently. I did all the audio mixing myself, which is not something that I had like training or a proper room to do it in. Like, I truly made the film on my own, like, in an attic space. Like before Final Cut Pro existed, there was a company called Edit DV that did like an early version of like digital video editing in 1999. And so I learned that program. I converted all the VHS and Beta SP tapes to mini DV. Like if I did it now, I would have not compressed them down to DV. They would have stayed at like their higher resolution original source.
Okay.
A lot of the film, I've like since then I've rescanned it to 4K or better formats. Like things I shot on film look better now that I transfer them at higher resolutions and did more color correction on them than the kind of like transferring them to DV that happened at that time. But the audio mixing, I kept running into people like Brian Paulson and John Goodmanson, who would, in a way that I didn't even necessarily understand, was like letting me know that the sound was terrible, being like, hey, like if you the next
Oh,
time you make
wow.
a documentary, like I'd love to mix it for you or whatever. Like, oh, that's very generous, and not realizing like, oh, right, because they can tell that it wasn't mixed.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. I never would have thought of that
yeah, okay, good.
because I'm just like, you're in
Yeah,
it, you
yeah.
know?
But there are things where I'm sure that levels are not necessarily consistent, and there's probably things that could have been filtered to be clear or or whatever. But no, I'm really like happy with it. I don't really like uh regret anything creatively that I did. Just the kind of technical things of it that I've learned how to do a better job of since then, maybe.
And a lot of the footage ends up in the next documentary we're
Yeah,
going to talk about. I mean, where else are you going to get Steven in a sauna,
yeah, exactly.
footage? It's like, it's iconic.
Those were my instincts at the time, like not to set it up in like a hotel suite with like 3-point lighting and like all that kind of thing. But
Right.
like, yeah, let's take the camera in the sauna. That'll be interesting.
Yeah. Or Bob talking and Steven poking his head behind and being like, hey, we got to leave in 10 minutes or
Yeah.
whatever. And he's like, okay,
And then like,
cool. It's just like, you just get their
yeah.
relationship
I think
still.
there's even like maybe basketball updates that Malcolm will kind of pop his head and tell Bob while we're filming. And you say, like
and,
whatever.
and the footage of the, what is it? The Kentucky
Yeah.
Derby.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's just like, oh, I guess I'll never go to that. That looked frightening.
Exactly. There is a world where like there are fewer DVD outlets, and so the thing does exist on YouTube, but like there are plenty of people that don't know that there is a Pavement movie called The Slow Century that currently exists and whatever.
Right.
Um, so there are people that are going to see or get promoted to for Pavements who don't know that like there are people that don't know that the band is a real band. Like some of them think that it's like they got cast members of Stranger Things and White Lotus to like do a fake documentary about like a middle-aged band that may or may not exist, like a Mighty Wind.
That's very heavy.
Yeah, and so to some extent, like it's helpful for me that there is like mention that there is a film called The Slow Century and it's good and it exists and
You can still get it.
okay, good. Yeah,
You can still get it. I guarantee it. Since we're talking about two films, at the end of every episode, I ask the same question. So I'm going to ask it twice, but I'm going to tailor it like I do on the show, depending on what we're talking about. And since you've made it, I understand it may be more difficult to answer. But on a scale from 1 to 100, how many seconds of Gary Young doing a handstand do you give Slow Century?
93.
That's what I have written here too.
Right? That's the
93
right
is
number.
exactly right.
Yeah, that's the right number.
Okay, so Pavements is wildly different. I mean, 24, 25 years have passed. They're known now, like they're a TikTok sensation. And this is probably a bit of a reaction to be like, okay, well, there needs to be a new story. But the film is a weird mashup of like this jukebox musical set to Pavement tunes, a like Hollywood biopic story with like kind of famous young actors in it, a museum that's dedicated to their history and kind of like blurring the lines a bit. Such a different tone than what you made earlier. So how do you get involved in this, and how do you shape something like this so that it's just not running away from people who might not know who Pavement are?
Exactly. Yeah. Like, time has passed. There's a whole new world of 16-year-olds every year who are falling in love with Galaxy 500 and Mary Margaret O'Hara and whatever that they start listening to every year.
I know, amazing. Love it.
And I like that. Like that's exciting to me that that's how the universe operates. And so it is great that new people are going to find this music, or people that heard it and had it in the background of their life at some point in the past are going to find out more or deepen their connection to it or what they get out of it by watching this movie or taking this in or whatever. And so also all the ripples that happen from this movie existing, where it ends up that the music ends up on more playlists or in more parking lots or whatever, it just kind of like strengthens its effect in the world in a way that I'm very happy about. um Essentially, the Matador were curious about making a new Pavement film that would help to kind of like bring in new listeners and keep them out there in the world. The band and the producers at Vice, Danny Gabai, all kind of said, well, wait, like Lance already made the Pavement documentary, The Slow Century, like that already exists. People can see that. We're happy with how that one came out. We don't really want to do a bunch of like sit down interviews and have other cultural figures doing sit down interviews about us. Like that's not really that cool.
They're so cool, man. You missed it.
Yeah, whatever. And yeah, exactly. So they had the good sense to not want to embrace that. Malcolmus had a kind of a good creative instinct that he suggested like, well, find an interesting screenwriter, not like someone that makes documentaries or does band films generally. And I think what Malcolmus had in mind was like Harmony Korine, a great screenwriter named John Raymond, that's a friend of ours here in Portland.
Yeah, he's been on the show.
Oh, great.
He
Yeah.
did the Source Family
Oh,
we talked
perfect.
about.
Those are kind of people that he had in mind. And then it kind of fell to Harmony said no. It kind of fell to a screenwriter in New York named Alex Ross Perry, who wrote a script, but then like when he sent it, like Malcolmus didn't read it, but he handed it to me and John Raymond to read. And I didn't think it was going to work as like a good film about Pavement. It seemed like it kind of was missing part of what was so great and admirable about the band and their music and the people around them. It kind of got some of that wrong in a way that I thought was not ideal or whatever. But they kind of knew that they were going to need my footage to make a Pavement film, and so they brought me in to kind of advise and provide the reference material and the footage that would end up kind of being a significant part of what the recreations and reenactment and sort of like Bohemian Rhapsody biopic type of a thing would be. Also, I'm curious, like I always thought that the word was pronounced biopic. Is it biopic?
I stay out of that.
Okay.
I really
Great.
don't know, but I say biopic.
Okay.
I think
cool.
I don't say biopic. I say biopic. How do you say it?
Okay. I say biopic just out of it. I don't, just from having read it, I assume that it was like a biographical picture.
You say it that way. I'll say it this way, and then
Right.
one of the listeners can get mad at us.
Sounds good.
So
they while the band was touring, there were like delays where, COVID would affect years worth of scheduled shows and they would get pushed. And they kind of got footage when they could during some of the rehearsals, which happened here in Portland at Halfling Studios. Rebecca Cole joined the band as sort of like an additional musician and also like a great figure for helping to, I don't know if musical director is the right word, but like to kind of like oversee everyone, getting their parts figured out. How do we get that sound to work right? And what are all the songs that make sense to play live? And what else can we learn that you weren't normally playing and all that? And then they shot some live footage at some of the concerts when they did resume touring. And while the band were in New York, they did there's that kind of clever, inventive thing that Scorsese did for the Dylan film out of the footage of the Rolling Thunder tour, where they introduced elements of seemingly true interviews from people, but who were not really who they were presenting themselves to be. There's a kind of like an art dealer in New York that presents himself as having been part of the tour or a concert promoter or something. And there's Sharon Stone, an actress who, presents information as though she had been on the tour, which she was not, in fact. And it is kind of part of how Dylan has obfuscated or fucked around with the truth in his use of pseudonyms and trickery and stuff over the years in a way that was like clever and inventive and original for Scorsese to lean into that and kind of adopt that in the form of documentary as well. I think Alex Ross Perry did a little bit of that as well with the art exhibit of stuff in New York. And then they did the musical with a great choreographer, Angela Trimber, involved, and some other great performers. And the great performer that did American Idiot is doing the vocals and singing, and the woman who did the Alanis Morissette jukebox musical is performing. Like a good mix of people carrying and doing that. And that's like, it kind of was played for laughs in the version that I rejected, like a cut that I got sent that I didn't like and didn't want to be involved in. So they had me kind of come in and work on the edit to weave in more of my stuff from over the years. I kind of dug through all the footage and found the more emotional moments of the people who were at the verge of tears or exhausted or really caring about what they're doing for that musical and wove that material in rather than the sort of like condescending ivory tower laughing down from above kind of tone that it previously had. And then went through and kind of tightened up the things that were flat or not playing well. There's a really like a thing that I made me not want to be involved in the film at all, where there was like a terrible representation of Kim Gordon and a terrible representation of Thurston Moore that was like the climax of the scripted thing that got written.
That's so
That I was like,
weird.
I don't want to be part of this. This is
Right.
really badly handled, and I hope no one ever sees it. It's really pretty terrible. Um, but um, flew to the edit and worked with Robert Greene, who is like a really caring, invested person, is a huge Pavement fan and is a professor of documentary filmmaking at the University of Missouri at the journalism school there. He's also involved in the True False Film Festival, which is a documentary film festival that specializes in movies that kind of deconstruct fact and fiction and play around with format, or might have recreations or misdirection, or kind of make you challenge or think about what are the structures that make a documentary work or interesting in the 21st century. He genuinely cares deeply about the band, and we dove deep through all of the footage I'd shot over the years and other archival stuff that I'd assembled. There's a great woman named Deb Pastor who toured with the band as a tour manager and also as a filmmaker, who shot a lot of footage along the way. We kind of went through the material that she had shot and built up a like, I don't think that the band members ever talked to Alex Ross Perry on camera, and so they didn't really have stuff that worked to tell the story of the band from their own perspective, other than things that I'd shot over the years or the other interviews that I kind of like archivally pulled together and held on to from that time period, or things that I'd assembled for the slow century. So we spent time kind of building up a version of the film that I would be comfortable putting out. And the film had been like rejected by several places in that earlier iteration, but once Robert Greene and I made these versions with all this other material in the kind of different tone that was like less snarky and mocking, it got into the Venice Film Festival, it got into London and New York, and all of a sudden like other backers and people got involved, and it got distribution, and will be out in theaters in the spring of 2025.
I guess I never thought that I would see this
Yeah.
combination of elements, like, oh, we'll get someone to play like Jason Schwartzman will play, Gerard Cosloy or something like that.
Yeah.
You have all these elements. You're trying to make it work and, trying to make it honor Pavement, but this is also what you have to work with. You have your material and this stuff, some of it that is just not tonally working, that you have to reshape.
Yeah.
How much of that was like, there's a lot of use of dual screen imagery and some elements where there's like, not psychedelic, but definitely like superimposition and things
Sure.
like that. Did the film really start coming once you found like an editing heart to this thing?
Yeah, I would say that Robert Greene's editing, and he is someone that leaned into and embraced so much diligent work, where he's taking fragments of audio and like parts or pieces of noise at the intro from the earliest things that they did, and weaving that into the film, and then layering multi-format kind of split screen stuff where you're watching video material on the left half of the screen, and then 60 millimeter scanned footage on the right half of the screen, and they're both are kind of adding up to a third thing. He went very deep into that format of experimental filmmaking and collage and sound design that really kind of made it a much deeper film than what had been there before. He truly put so much work into, and he's such a knowledgeable and deep fan of Pavement's music, and I would suggest that people really acknowledge how much Robert Greene put into this film and what he made out of it.
There are two moments in the film that, just in terms of telling the story of Pavement, are from archival footage that I had never seen before that said a lot. One was the footage of Pavement on stage at the was it Tibet show?
Ah, yeah.
I'd never seen that.
Yeah, that footage hasn't really circulated much. That's not really like on the internet.
I tried to find it afterwards. I was like, I can't find like the whole thing, and it's really, I've been on stage in situations like that with a band where it's just it's not going
Yeah.
well, and they don't know how to get the thing off the ground. Also, the iconic footage of them playing Lollapalooza and getting
Yep.
pelted and hurt with but what you see on stage, and then I've never seen the footage of them afterwards
Yeah.
kind of laughing it off and just like lifting their shirt and showing their bruises, and like they're fine. But in my
Yeah.
head, that footage was always like, and it's in slow century too.
Correct.
I just was always like, oh, this did not help their cause. Like
No.
this not,
No.
and then you realize like, oh, they're just like, this is dumb. They're fine.
Yeah. I would love to talk about both of those. So the first thing you're referring to happens very early in the film, like once we kind of like, get the film kicked off. The band are on stage. It's probably 1997, probably touring for
Right in the corners. Yeah.
Right in the Corners. And they had played the Tibetan Freedom concert in San Francisco at Golden Gate Park the year before, and had a great set where they did like a good cover of the Velvet Underground's What Goes On. And there's footage of that that's in like a Tibetan Freedom concert documentary film that I worked on. Roman Coppola, Spike Jonze, a bunch of us shot a ton of footage in a bunch of different formats, some on film, some on video, that ended up, I think, the Beastie Boys kind of, our friend Adam Yauch put that whole thing together. And then I think had Grand Royal oversee making this sort of like concert film documentary of all the performances that happen out there. There's a great Bjork performance of Hyper Ballad. There's I think like a Porno for Pyros set. There's a lot of good footage from that festival that happened in San Francisco at Golden Gate Park. A year or two later, they did another festival in New York at Randall's Island, and this is the footage that's in the movie, which otherwise is not on the internet and has not really leaked out. Pavement are not doing well, and Malkmus is occasionally capable of being bratty or dismissive of the rest of the band. So you see him on stage, when they're trying to figure out what to play next, and he's just sort of like, no, that song sucks. No, that song's stupid. No, not that one. Yeah, just play that one, whatever. Like the rest of the guys look so uncomfortable. It's like broad daylight. They're fully lit. There's no mystery. There's nowhere to hide. There's
Oh
no
my
kind of just
God.
like put your head down and get through the song. Like he's like, shooting down the idea of like what songs they're going to play. So that footage did not end up being used in any documentaries or MTV specials or
Right.
whatever that festival. But it is like true. There was that side of them where they had a kind of a famously terrible show during the tour for Terror Twilight in 1999. They played in Coachella at what might have been the first Coachella festival. And
Oh, wow. Okay.
it was dry and dusty, and they'd done the whole West Coast run, and Malkmus is kind of tired and his voice was a little bit shot. It's daylight. They're out in the sun and the dust. And he just kind of like can't really sing that well. So the band are trying to help by doing a few more songs, or what kind of like long, mostly instrumental covers can we play? I think he's wearing sunglasses most of the show. And like, that was kind of a low point for the band that helped him to solidify knowledge of like, it's time to like wrap this up with the European tour and then kind of be done for this, span of time with the band. So that footage at the opening, if you're watching a documentary that's typically like a hagiography of a band, you're seeing them at this moment of real discontent with themselves, and the singer not just kind of putting on a brave face or the show must go on, but kind of like talking openly to the other band members about like, these songs are not good, or that one sucks, or let's not play that one, or no on that, or whatever. So it's pretty revealing and pretty honest and surprising and works well. And that's a moment where the editor, Robert Greene, is doing a split screen montage where that's on the right half of the screen while we're seeing them currently rehearsing in Portland for what will be a much more positive reunion tour in 2020, 2022.
Yes.
So that's like a great effective moment where you're seeing the same human at different points in his life in different moods with the same band and the same combination of people.
And then the Lollapalooza.
Yeah. So the tour manager for that is Deb Pastor, who was with the Jesus Lizard at the time, but shooting a lot of footage of Pavement. And she's great. And so she catches that whole occasion where they're playing in West Virginia, and Bob Nastanovich's father has come out to come see the band live. David Berman, who's a college friend of Bob and Malcolmus, who had the band The Silver Jews with them after starting the band Ectoslavia, that had been the first musical output that Malcolmus and Bob Nastanovich had. He's there, and there's like a mud pit, and they get warned by the members of the Mighty Mighty Bosstones that like, hey, the crowd's kind of rowdy and kind of rambunctious, and like, I don't know, guys.
Get ready.
Yeah, get ready. And they go out there, and sure enough, people are just like stomping in the mud, and then start picking up mud and rocks and throwing it at Pavement while they're trying to play. And the band kind of take it for a while, but like a rock covered in mud just hits Malcolmus in the chest, and he just is like, I'm not doing this anymore. You can hear the thud of like a stone hitting him in the chest. And yeah, like it's not really a good idea to stay out there and take one to the head and get your skull fractured, or a terrible brain injury or whatever. So they stop playing and kind of leave. Spiral Stairs, Scott Canberg, confronts the crowd and kind of goes to the front of the stage and pulls his pants down and kind of moons them, and then is flipping them off with both hands and yelling them insults at them. And that's like, funny and entertaining to some of the crowd. So that sequence plays in the first Pavement film that I made, The Slow Century. And then what we used in this and Pavements is more of the footage that Deb Pastor shot of them in the immediate aftermath, where they're backstage in those same clothes, kind of like commiserating, but laughing it off, like kind of like, it wasn't the end of the band or some big tragedy. They kind of like, it's a funny thing that happened at the show in West Virginia, oh well. And seeing that kind of humanizing stuff
absolutely
in Pavements is like an additional layer of depth beyond what I showed in The Slow Century. And I'm glad that footage is in here. And again, Deb Pastor is the filmmaker who shot that, while also like was a great tour manager throughout the 90s for both Pavement and the Jesus Lizard.
Yeah, I it did humanize it, and it, in a weird way, it totally altered my storyline in my head of Pavement. Because it's always been like, oh, there are the handcuffs on the microphone. Oh God, it's like, okay. And then, the last three songs and Steven walking away, like you caught, you know a lot of this footage. You were there. And so I did appreciate that through the editing. It felt like there were more chances to, humanize in a way, because like the acting stuff with the kids playing Pavement and things like that. And they're trying to copy or get the affectations of Pavement. It's like a very non-human way of like identifying with Pavement. You know what I mean? It's like they're not really interested in getting in the heart of Pavement. They want to just know what his tonsils look like, or what they were wearing on a certain day. And so it must have been hard in a way to find a way to make these things that are kind of cynical and a little bit more colder interspersed with like the real part of who Pavement are.
Yeah, I tried to weave as much of, also like, I have to say Malcolmus and the band are averse to anything that's like saccharine or overly glamorizing, or like, oh, weren't they the best? Like,
Sure.
They don't have an instinct to kind of like lean into that. They would rather avoid that or whatever. But like, my intention of having more humanity or heart, or the qualities that I admired or what I loved about the band, be reflected in the film of Pavements, are things that I kind of like wove in or made a point to do. And I do think that like, I do like there's about 8 minutes of footage from this kind of scripted biopic type of a thing that Alex Ross Perry wrote, that I do like the moments that we kept in there. I think that Joe Keery does a pretty entertaining job of like being funny and acting like his sense of Stephen Malcolmus from watching the video footage from The Slow Century. I do like that.
It's that scene with the vocal coach.
Yes. Yeah.
Where he's like, yeah, it's just like, I can't stop talking. Like, I got that thing. She's like, you're doing it now. He's like, oh.
Yeah. I do love all of that. I think he did a very good job.
Very method.
Yes. I admire what he pulled off in those performances.
Again, it's a very kaleidoscopic telling of a band that you never think would have a TikTok hit.
Yeah.
Let alone a biopic, whether it's real or not. Yeah, it's just a really different film, tonally than what you had made before.
I think that people talk in these kind of like cliches about like, you don't have to know about the band or whatever, but like genuinely, like it could be a made up band that never existed in the format that like the film Pavement takes, with this blend of fact and fiction and documentary and recreation and avoidance of typical documentary structure. The fact that they are like a real genuine band that were making phenomenal records throughout the 1990s adds so much to it, but like the film would still work if it was about a made up side project thing or whatever. um yeah, I do think that like the musical is genuinely works, like the taking those lyrics and melodies and like rearranging them in the format of a Broadway musical, like surprisingly holds up and translates and does work. And the effort that those singers and dancers put into it is really human and real. And I don't know, I loved that. I love the moments of Jason Schwartzman and Tim Heidecker as the Chris and Gerard from Matador are like very funny. I think they did a great job.
What does he say? Like, you've made a loosey goosey album with Wowee
Yeah,
Zowee. They're like, there's not even a fourth side. It's like, oh
yeah,
my God,
yeah.
so great.
I do like all of that. I think that like some of Alex's funniest lines that he wrote are in that section, uh, and they're true. Like it is a three-sided record, which is a unconventional thing to press and put out.
I remember getting that record and listening to it with Sam Coombs. So many of Pavement records were like, you got it on the day it came out and you
Yeah,
sat somewhere and listened to it. And I just remember we were just like, when it was done, we're like, wow, like this is not the follow up to Crooked Gray. It's just like,
right.
it was so cool. But I remember even sometimes we looked at each other and we are like, I don't know. Like it was, yeah. So it's kind of great that that got captured in some sort of alternate universe. I think it's smart
Sure.
that was the record. If any of them had to be zeroed in on, you know.
Yes. And again, like the love that Robert Greene, the editor who's also a producer on the film, has for the band, and he more so than myself, I think he truly loves Wowee Zowee, and so
Mhm.
he didn't have that sense of like, I had a sense of being let down in real life in real time with the recorded version of, for example, Fight This Generation
Sure.
versus the live version that's in the film. It's in both films, I think.
Yeah, it is. It is in Solar Century.
It's
Yeah,
in both
yeah.
films where they, again, it's like moments after finding out that Kurt had ended his life, having to come out on stage at the 40 Watt Club in front of an audience and perform. And they open with that unreleased song that none of us had heard of Fight This Generation, and that much more intense and ferocious performance of it that's in both films. When I heard the recorded version on Wowee Zowee with the kind of less intense tempo and the kind of goofier bloops and bleeps that take over near the end of it, I was like, oh no, like this is a missed opportunity. This should have been, this like landmark song, and
Yeah.
instead it sort of just kind of slipped by. Um, but with the love that Robert Greene and other people have of Wowee Zowee as an overall work and all of its misdirections and side turns and variety of different approaches of songwriting and sound, structurally the film Pavements works like Wowee Zowee, and it ends with Western homes. Like it kind of, at a certain point, it turns into, we're literally going through Pueblo and half a canyon and like side three of Wowee Zowee. And that's like a subtle thing that I don't think everyone picks up on, but the film in its current cut goes on too long and doesn't totally, like, it feels like it's already come to an ending and another song starts and like you end up with like Western homes during the credits, and like that is intentional. I think there's a chance I'm going to tighten the film up from the version that you've
Hmm.
seen that's about 2 hours and 9 minutes. I think that there's a probably like a more satisfying version that has fewer endings, that lands more decisively, and I think I'm going to go work on trimming it down a bit to get to that point. But yeah, the current version that you've watched does feel like Wowee Zowee, and that is partly a
Oh, that's
A
so brilliant.
subtext from Robert
I
Greene.
love that it ended on that song too. That was, for some reason, it
Yeah,
was like, I was like, oh, this is the Pavement's Residence song. Like, it
yes,
was just like,
yes,
they don't have a song that sounds like this at all.
yes,
And that's saying a
yeah,
lot for Pavement, who had a lot of songs that didn't sound like anything else that they were going to do again.
right,
Oh my God.
yeah,
I had a question for you.
sure.
If you could make a documentary about something that couldn't be made, like, so, like either an art movement or a band or a person that just, through the history of time, is there something that you would be like, oh, I wish I could have done this, or I wish I could have told that story?
Yeah, there still hasn't been like a great Nirvana film.
Hmm.
Like I did work with them, and I did the sort of the box set and like a thing called With the Lights Out. That's like a DVD of a bunch of their performances and footage. Um, but doing like a proper thing that really kind of got the nuance of like what was so singular about Kurt Cobain and the combination of him and Chris and the various drummers that they played with, that really kind of like represented like the mood and the feeling and the aesthetics of that specific time and the world that he was coming out of. I feel like that's slipping away or going to get lost with, there's so much love for him and so
Yeah,
much people having their own relationship to that music, but the like specifics of what them going into like a Radio Shack in
oh,
Tacoma to like videotape
so
themselves,
amazing.
like what that looked like and smelled like and sound like I wish that like there was a way to kind of make something definitive out of that before it was completely gone or too late or whatever. I wish that I had access to Prince's materials and was making a true portrait of Prince from all of the material that was shot with him over the years and
Totally.
conversations with the people that knew him genuinely. Like people have written good books in different forms
Hmm.
about him, but they haven't all been in one place. And that's a person that's fascinating that I wish that there was like a great definitive documentary about. I think that the filmmaker that was trying to make one
Yes.
has run into like, yeah, is run into some kind of an impasse.
Yeah, it's run. It's maybe not coming out now.
Yeah.
Right.
And so uh maybe I'm glad that I didn't spend a decade.
The Nirvana one would be great though, because it's still, it came out of that band. No one saw that coming. It was so innocent.
Yeah.
No one was like, we're gonna be, teenagers are still going to be having posters of him on their wall, someday. It's
Yeah.
there's something beautiful about the flukiness of it. And one of the things that happens at the beginning of the film is it says, Pavement broke up in 99 and it wasn't that big a deal. But to me, Pavement seemed huge. And
Yeah.
did they
Yeah.
seem big to you too? Because to me, I was like,
You did, but you may be the perfect person to have this conversation. Like, it seemed like a full, I just was wrong. I assumed that there was like as many people in every
yes,
city as there were at the 40 Watt Club. Like, I assumed that was also happening in Bloomington and Montgomery, and it wasn't, and that like, oh, that was like one of 8 places where that was happening. And so I thought because like the newsstands of every Barnes and Noble and tower across the United States had Option and Magnet, and that if there's like this many magazines about Superchunk, they must be selling 500,000 copies of
right.
No Pocket for Kitty. And then when it was like, oh no, like there's like 20,000 copies of those records getting pressed. How can there be like 12 magazines with 100 pages each every month?
Yes, it's blown my mind. The Trouble Boys book about the Replacements.
Yeah,
When Bob says that like Tim sold less than 50,000 copies,
yeah,
I just was like, how is that possible? But then you're right. You do the math. 2,000 people in every major city, maybe, and
yeah,
then nowhere else. And you add up
yeah,
those 20 cities, and you're like,
yeah,
all right, maybe 40,000, 30.
yeah,
But it just, to me, you know, uh, bands would come through, Husker Du, whoever, and you'd be
yeah,
like, you just assume that they were just these massive bands in there, in the underground at least. And
yeah,
then you it was a real surprise to me, and I
yeah.
still forget that, like, Pavement, yeah, they were one of the biggest bands in that world, but that was a very low ceilinged world.
I guess I also, like every mall had a record store.
Right.
And there were malls in every city or suburban outpost around every city. And they were getting shipments of everything on Columbia and A&M and whatever. And so I assumed that like the people were buying those or something, but they
Me too.
weren't. Like, yeah.
No, it's so wild. And because everyone we knew had Wowee Zowee, right? Yeah. The 40 people we knew, it just was like, that's kind of where it stopped too. It's like, oh, the people that they knew were also me and you. And so, but yeah, it was, I thought that was really interesting at the beginning of the film when the titles come up and it says that. And then that when they reform, it is a big deal.
Yeah.
It put it in perspective for me.
And that is the thing that is different now, where, you know, there are so many bands, and even though you read like a rave review and from a writer you trust or whatever, like there might not have been like the ability to go buy a copy of Clan of Zymox and the Silos and Walter Salas Homero, whatever, that like, but now in the course of 8 minutes, you could have heard like a song from each of those three
absolutely
performers and be like, okay, I get it. Oh, maybe I like the Silos or whatever. But that would have been like, you know, $42 worth of expense.
Yes.
There's
no way.
Take a chance on.
No way. No, I love it.
Yeah, no, like I'm proud of the films, both. I am happy that people are going to get to see Pavements projected in a bunch of theaters in North America when it's out in theaters in the spring. It'll also be available on streaming. Look forward to more and more people discovering how great Grounded is and how great Secret Knowledge of Backroads is, and all these amazing songs that they did in so many different forms. Yeah, I'm very happy.
Well, like I did before, I got to ask again, on a scale from 1 to 100, how many seconds of Gary Young doing a handstand do you give Pavements?
I think we got to divide by all the different parts of the film. So I don't know, like 87 feels right.
I think that's right. I was 2 off, but that's great.
Okay. Were you at 89?
I was at 85.
Okay.
So yeah,
I think 87. Let's round it up to 87.
I love it. Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday. We are a completely independently produced affair, so the best way to support us is to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app and to subscribe to our Patreon over at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get exclusive weekly bonus episodes every Sunday, as well as one-of-a-kind handmade Revolutions Per Movie goods that I send out to you. You can follow the show on social media at Revolutions Per Movie and find more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!